So, let's get the show on the road. So, reflective practice in the workplace and why and how we should use it. What are we going to look at tonight? I'm going to talk about leadership and management, just some of the fundamentals on this. And as you see here, this guy, John Cotter from Harvard Business School, he writes this piece and he talks about leadership and management are two distinctive and complementary systems of action. Each has its own function and characteristic activities. So both are necessary for success in an increasingly complex and volatile business environment. We often refer to business as highly complex adaptive systems. Okay, so strong leadership and with weak management is no better and is sometimes actually worse than the reverse. So the real challenge is to combine strong leadership and strong management and use each to balance the other. Okay, so there's that it's a very powerful way of defining that they're two distinct, albeit one and the same person. The Holy Trinity, but only two of them. And you will have another good writer is Warren Bennis. He talks about management and leadership, and he often says that we are overmanaged and under-led in organizations, and unfortunately that's still very true. But there are reasons for that. Oftentimes it's driven because of organizational pressures to produce results. How do we get results? We measure, and so on and so forth. So everything becomes measurable, and we tend to lose the softer side of the management, which is essentially the leadership. So anyone can be a manager, but not everyone can be a leader. Or as the other way around, it said, every leader is a manager, but not every manager is a leader. All that sort of stuff. So we're setting the kind of scene here. And here are some of the Venn diagram, which kind of shows the overlap. Managers do things right. They follow the book. They don't like change, status quo. They're short term. Can't see, don't have the vision to see forward, and a means to an end, and are builders and are problem solving, firefighting and so on and so forth, as opposed to the other side of the camp. So do the right thing. So oftentimes a leader will kind of skirt around, or not directly follow the rules, or some of the processes will allow for free thinking. So someone that will take a calculated risk, and a leader encourages that. And it might just say, well, if it's a calculated risk, are you not just contradicting what you just said there, that everything is measurable? In a manner of speaking, yes, but it gives the freedom to take action. So implicit in that is trust and respect for your followers as a leader. So whereas a manager will delegate and offload stuff, and they do it quite adeptly. A leader will know your limits, will know how much you're capable of, and will stretch those limits. And that's really, really important when we want to understand leadership, as opposed to pure management. So they know how far to push a team, they know how far to push an individual to achieve results. But more importantly, don't get frustrated. They have the patience to be able to stand back a little bit and give free rein. So this is where we talk about doing the right thing. So as long as, generally speaking, it's legal, and I better be careful when I look at some of the occupations around here. Better be very careful what I say. But generally speaking, yes, that within the realms of acceptable societal norms. Let's put it that way. And then they look for change, and most of us now, and I wouldn't say there's a person inside here who likes the status quo. I'm not talking about Rossi and the lads as in status quo, but we don't like the same routine and same patterns, although there are times when they work, but mostly we'll do things differently. Why? Because we like change. We get bored. As individuals, we do get bored with doing the same thing day in, day out, and so on. So we'll try something new. We'll do it from a different perspective. And that's where the fun begins, when you start to self-critique, evaluate, reflect on the way you're doing things and create change. But in terms of leadership, we promote change, because that way it brings out the best in us. We're constantly challenging ourselves to do things better. In other words, How can we improve on the way we did what we previously did, essentially? So looking for, and we're more long term. We see the bigger picture. And again, like strategy, which would be a big picture, these things change, and we need to have the adaptability, the flexibility, the agility to be able to adapt to change as it's happening. That's the key in this point, that how quickly we respond to change. First and foremost, that we can actually see it coming down the roads, and we can actually take some corrective action before it actually happens. And then we see the end results, or we see the end picture, and we're architects. We put the trust in the team around us to build an organization or a team that can achieve results. I'm not going to even mention anything about soccer and the way they take their managers and throw them to the wolves, if they don't score a goal. But that's just other stuff. But in the real world, it takes time to build up competencies in an organization, build up competencies and capabilities within your team. And it has to be done at a pace, and it has to be the right pace. That's where leaders come into it, instead of pushing from a management perspective. And then, of course, lastly, then we look at this inspiring and motivating. And often the inspiration comes from the way they do things themselves, and how they can subtly influence an outcome without being even present. Now that sounds a little bit cryptic, but you can have people they have a persona, they have a way of doing things, and we try to emulate these. We like those elements of people. This diagram, again, one of my more favorite diagrams, which describes some of the key characteristics of leadership. Now, if we look up and go around from 12 o'clock, we look at firstly honesty and integrity. Simply put, if you try it on with a team or with an organization once, if you set unrealistic goals, or if you say we need to have this by the end of next week, and it transpires that in actual fact it wasn't needed for 2 weeks, but you as a leader or a manager cut off the extra week to try and get the job done to impress your boss and say, look how quickly I got it done, so on, for you've burned bridges, because your team will never trust you again, and your integrity becomes extremely questionable. So you have to have principles, essentially, and openness and honesty and integrity are key to having that. Self-confidence, really interesting one, in the context of, well, let me go back a step. Your Myers-Briggs evaluation will give you some indication of your confidence levels as well. Now I used to in my novice days run a poll on this, and it was a question back, and the giveaway was in the question. If I were to ask you what personality type would you think I have, excuse me, the default was towards you're extrovert and blah blah blah. In actual fact, I'm not. I'm an introvert, and that's why it's important to get these balances right. Where am I going with this? We create coping mechanisms, and that's why I mentioned humor and so on. That's one of my coping mechanisms. I'm meeting a whole room full of strangers, or one or two maybe tonight. It would be the same if I was physically there with you. I'd still have the same persona, and I don't put up the facade. What you see is pretty much what you get. I'm just too old. In any case, the point about this is that having an understanding of your confidence levels, you know then when you will cross the line into arrogance, and that's very dangerous. And it's a very thin line, and sometimes we become so confident that we do cross that line into the level of arrogance, and that immediately will be reflected in your followers, insofar as that they will pull back, and all sorts of hell will break loose when that starts happening, because you begin to perceive yourself as almost invincible. That's taking it to the extreme. But having a level of confidence and self-confidence is also required of a leader, because people want to be able to trust that person, and therefore they can see a level of confidence. And oftentimes you see this, you say in first responders, for example, are great exponents of this, that they have a level of confidence. They know the process, they know the drill pretty much to the T, yet each situation is very different, generally speaking. Correct me, any first responders, if I'm talking rubbish here, but they'll assess the situation very well. But they'll be able to muster anyone else around them. If it was a crash scene, some people will be totally hysterical, other people will be shocked, and some people will be running around, what can I do, and so on and so forth. And they have this calming effect, and people begin to have the confidence, and because they can see, they know what this person is doing, how they're doing it, and the way they speak, and how to say, what's the word I'm looking for? Oh, Jesus. Yeah, how they take command of the situation and so on. So people begin to have confidence in them. So not only is it your own self-confidence and your assuredness, but people can actually pick up on it. And in critical situations like that, it's extremely important. But on a less challenging environment in an organization, you still have the same type of scenario where people, problem solving, and someone has this level of confidence, they have so much detail, and they involve other people to come up with a shared solution and so on. Emotional stability. Wow. Simply put, when you win a deal, you're not running around breaking open the champagne and giving high fives. And when you don't win a deal, or when something goes wrong, or you lose market share, that you're running around or not running around, and you're curled up in a ball in the corner and giving out like hell. They're two pretty much extreme situations. But nevertheless, people like to see that, during good times and bad times, that there's a level of stability and people's emotions don't change too much. And, I will say I was privileged to have worked for an overall project manager. His name was Terjo Nurmi. He was Finnish. I worked for a Finnish company for 5 or 6 years. And Terjo, if I were to describe him to you, he was like a double for Ronnie Drew. Seriously, he looked, eyes, face, beard, the works. And he drank like a fish as well. Terry Drew used to be on, on project meetings, and these project meetings had kick-off dinners and all that sort of stuff. For to start the projects, you wouldn't see Terry Drew for 3 or 4 weeks, and half the time he was in the horrors. No, I wasn't that bad. But over the course of the couple of years that I worked with him in a project, it was while I was still working with Ericsson back in 92, 94 time frame. I was over in Germany, and Terry Joe was the Finnish overall project manager. We were developing your first GSM mobile systems, going from the analog to digital mobile phones, going from the bricks to the small little phones. We developed that system along with, Motorola were doing their thing, and so on, a couple of companies competing at the same time. But Terji was doing this. But one of the most remarkable traits that he had was his emotional stability throughout, because all sorts of hell was happened during the course of the project, and particularly when we had something like, there was something like 18 different nationalities involved. So you can imagine the cultural issues, the work ethic, and so on. There's a hell of a difference between a Finn and a Finnish person, and we say an Italian or a Spanish, and then throw a few Germans into the mix, then stick a couple of Irish lads, and everything in between, and you've got one hell of a cauldron of different attitudes, work, practice, and so on. But Terjo had a real grasp of all of this and provided that level of stability. Excuse me. Moving on, we have cognitive ability. And that's, again, where your ability to be able to seize or size up a situation, how quickly you're picking up on the signals around you. That's fundamentally what our cognitive ability is, how tuned in you are. More recent research is saying that we have a second brain, which is basically in our stomach or intestine, and have a nerve system connected to what's it, medulla, is it, or whatever. I'm not a biologist or a neurologist or anything like that, but essentially, yes. But it goes back to the old saying, your gut feeling. So now they're beginning to prove biologically that does exist. but we've always kind of known ourselves that yes, if it doesn't feel right, then it isn't right. The usual saying, that if you're getting a 2018 Mercedes for 15,000 euros, Jesus, that's a great deal. Too good to be true. Most likely it is. Probably no engine in the car. I don't know. So that's stating the obvious, but on a more nuanced environment, how to be able to pick up signals when things are going possibly wrong, maybe friction between some of the team players themselves, work colleagues, and so on, things happening in other departments, being able to pick up on these signals and how finely tuned you are. That's fundamentally the cognitive ability. Knowledge of a business, which sounds, that why would that even be in there if we're talking about leadership traits? Funnily enough, it does command respect. How well you know your business, and I always get these two never mixed up. Willie Walsh and Louis Walsh. But in the case of Willie Walsh, as where is he now? He's head of British Airways and the new company, or whatever it is. I've lost track of him. But when he was with Aer Lingus, and he came up through the ranks, pilot and so on and so forth, so he knew the job. He knew what was involved in getting people on, loading a plane, getting people on, flying on destinations. So he knew, and he made it his business to know the other functions, traffic control, air traffic control, and so on, so on, so on. And then when Dublin Airport DEA was running into trouble financially. He was one of the final candidates that was approached to possibly take over, and spoke to one of his mentors, and he was saying, "What will I do? Will I take this job or not? If I make a horse's ass of it, my reputation is ruined. I'm gone. I'll never, was he MD of Aer Lingus at the time, and he was moving into the absolute details I can't remember. But in any case, his conversation was, if I make a mess of it, I might as well leave the country. But if I turn it around, which I believe I can, then I'm going to be a hero." And his mentor turned around and said, "Nope, you'll be one of many heroes." And the message being that in success, people jump onto it. Everyone wants to share in success. People will actually try and claim it for themselves. Again, this is all part of the maturity of leadership. So in the case of Willie Walsh, because he knew the business, he was able to take it from stage A to stage B and so on, and the rest is history, taking responsibility for what he's done. On the flip side of that, you would be surprised, or probably not, the number of senior managers in organizations who don't actually know how their products or services are made and delivered. Might not even know the components. They just know we sell products, this is it, blah, 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 and so on. They don't know the nuts and bolts in it. And Kawasaki, I think, were one of the originators in this area. I think Toyota followed suit. But every employee would spend somewhere in the region of 6 months on the production lines, learning how the products were made, whether you were, as they described in their own case studies, whether you're the janitor or the new vice president for a particular department or function or business within the conglomerate itself. You all spend time learning the nuts and bolts, and that's how you garner respect. So the knowledge of the business itself commands respect, and also enables you to be able to contribute. Carla Fiorentino, when she was head of HP, spent the first several weeks or a month or two just going through the finances of her company when she took over as president and CEO of HP. And to understand the literally the finances of it, and make it worthwhile, so that she could actually talk and interact competently with all the other vice presidents in that organization. Jack Welch, the same thing, knowing his stuff. So know your stuff and learn from the bottom up. Although Jack Welch did say when he took over as CEO, some of the other vice presidents arrived in with manuals saying, here's the cheat sheet, the quick and dirty solution to what you need to know more or less told him to get out of the office in no uncertain terms. He's going to find out. He'll go down and learn himself. And then, of course, the next one we have is drive. And that really comes down to your own self-motivation, but also how it becomes evident and clear to others. And strangely enough, you do need to, as you're moving up through the echelons of an organization, demonstrating your leadership skills and management skills, but more so leadership, you do have to be fit. And I mean physically and mentally fit. And that underpins your drive. Some guys I had known over the years, as they were being groomed for senior positions, took up jogging, started swimming, lost weight, transformed their images, and so on and so forth, because they knew they were heading on a journey. And to be able to do that and to have the mental and physical stamina to be able to keep going at the pace that's now is going to be expected of them. Again, knowing the pace and pushing yourself, and then knowing also how to drive your followers. In other words, virtually by way of example. But there's no point in you demonstrating you can run a marathon, whereas half your team can hardly walk to the local pub or something like that. I don't know. That's just polar opposites. But in any case, we're looking at what drives you, what do you get, what's your satisfaction. And another point really related to this from leaders, a lot of the drive is derived from seeing others succeed. And oftentimes really effective leaders lead from behind. And they encourage because they see the bigger picture, and if we can get the people moving and the employees moving in the right direction, they get tremendous satisfaction out of that alone. Okay. And here's the deal breaker: desire to lead. You can have all of these previous or prior attributes, traits of leadership, and you might have them in abundance. But fundamentally, it comes down to a question: do you actually want to lead? Do you want to take responsibility for this organization, for this department, for this team? Because there is a lot of responsibility coming with it. Hence the drive. You need to have the fitness and the levels and the mental capacity to be able to take on all of this extra stuff. And interestingly, some people just don't. Some people don't want to take on that desire or have that desire to want to lead. And it's an interesting, evolution of leadership and management in organizations. And the more cognitive aware managers, senior managers in an organization can spot that. Say Mark, for instance, he hasn't applied for any jobs here lately. He hasn't applied for any promotions or so on and so forth. But yet things get done. They are in tune. They know that, Mark is happy enough being in the background and helping and supporting and other individuals. But do we have mechanisms for recognizing that? I'm not, I'd say no. But in formal organizations, yes, we do. We have appraisal systems, and we have the professional development mechanisms and so on that can isolate those type of situations, which can be rare enough. But nevertheless, they exist. And as a leader, you need to be aware of those. You need to be aware of these individuals or characters or persons or professionals, call them what you will, that have these abilities that are key to a team's success, but don't want to take the responsibility of leading the team. Sometimes they come in and throw in some of their expert knowledge as such, just to help the team or help someone new or someone that's a novice in this particular area to get them up to speed and get things going. So we need to be able to recognize them, but they don't want to be a project leader or a team leader or department leader as such, or a manager, whatever the case may be. So that's the wheel of traits that forms a lot of the underpinnings of where we're going from here. So complementary strengths between managers and leaders. How am I doing time-wise? Oh, am I supposed to shut up at 9:30? Uh,
45.
I think it's 9:45.
9:45, is it? I'm supposed to shut up. Okay, we better move quickly because I'm only on slide 5 out of 15. Don't panic, don't panic. Anything that I don't cover, I'll append to the video, and you get it. Anyway, you can see these comparisons down along here. Processes versus people. Leadership is dealing with people, feelings, emotion. All of the points I've been alluding to and mentioned explicitly this far. Persuasion, power. And rather than coercive power. You see managers' position. I am the manager, therefore you do as I tell you, kind of stuff. Whereas in the leadership, they don't need that. They don't rely on these and titles and so on and so forth and positions to achieve results. Possibility thinking, in other words, look for opportunities, creative, critical thinking, proactive, and so on and so on. And they have a vision and they have a set of values and a shared set of values with their staff and employees and team members, and very good at verbal communication. And as opposed to written communication, they can do both, of course. But personally, not because of leadership management, personally, I prefer verbal communication. Although my written word is quite different in many respects, and the way I express myself in writing. And one of the reasons is because as you're writing stuff, you're actually thinking a little bit more. You're actually reflecting on what you're doing as you're writing it, whereas sometimes you'd splurt stuff out in verbal communications. But the real reason why verbal communications in leadership context is important, because people can see the nuances, the signals, the hints, the tells, the giveaways, the expressions, the gestures, the non-verbal communications. That's why it's so important in a leadership context. Just look at any of the guys, famous world leaders, Barack Obama, and for example, the way he speaks, the way he delivers his verbal communications, and so on, so on. There's any number of people. And then the last point, standardization and innovation. That's status quo versus non-status quo. Thinking of things, constantly innovating or changing the way we're doing things already, as opposed to standardization. Follow the process. Process doesn't, yeah, if it doesn't fit within the process, then people don't want to know, or the manager says, no, can't do with this, blah, blah, blah. Don't think outside the box, in other words. And I know that's a horrendous expression, think outside the box, but my God, it's ever so true. We have to provide that kind of environment where people can actually think more freely. In terms of the pure leadership, we have essentially charismatic and transformational leadership. Are they distinct? No. And let's look at the charismatic leader here. So creates exceptionally strong relationships between the leader and the follower. So they now, in terms of relationship, we know where, as a leader, where you know where to draw the boundaries. It doesn't mean that you're going to become best buds and all this sort of stuff and go out drinking every weekend and going over to each other's houses and all that sort of stuff. Some people interpret leadership as that kind of collegiality and openness and so on and so forth. Whereas in actual fact, by definition, when you look at your leadership style, that can actually fall into the realms of country club manager. They like to be popular. They exist. So you have the pure popular people focused, and then you have project managers who are, okay, I'm off the screen, people managers and process managers, project managers, essentially, aimed at objectives, and somewhere in between. You have, and then down the bottom corner, you have these guys called the impoverished managers. If you fall into that category, are you doomed? Absolutely not. That's where some real stars shine. But we'll come back to that when we're talking about these categories and leadership and evaluation. So they articulate a clear vision. They can say exactly where we're going to a point. They won't be absolutely explicit, but they can share a future state of an organization or a project with the team itself, based on values, what they already know and what they believe, having assimilated all the data, the information around them. Model values consistently with the vision, so they're true to their word, the integrity and honesty. They don't break agreements. They don't, they operate with the utmost integrity. You can trust them, and that's the key word in any organization. Trust. Out of that comes respect, and then the rest is all building blocks. Display confidence in followers' abilities, and that takes a level of self-confidence to be able to say, I can take a chance on this person. I believe that person can do it. Just in the right conditions and right circumstances, that person can perform better than they're already doing. And that's simply by knowing their staff. And that's a really key point, knowing your staff exceptionally well, knowing their limits, knowing what makes them, what drives them and what doesn't drive them. So if you have a look at these two, then they have the ethical and unethical. So provide developmental opportunities, open positive and negative feedback, recognize others' contribution, share information, and concern with the interests of the group itself in terms of the ethical type of charismatics. Then you have the unethical. Control and manipulation of followers. Do what's best for themselves. So now you're moving into the ego side of things. And here's one for you. Mother Teresa would fall into or had fallen into the unethical charismatics. A number of theses that analyze her behavior and so on and so forth from the people who actually worked with her found that she was actually the label they were putting on was a toxic leader, which I will talk about in more depth later on, but not tonight, obviously. But toxicity in organizations exists. If you have been unfortunate enough to be exposed to extremely toxic environments, my heart goes out to you. But they do exist. And how do we cope with these things and so on? But you do have these egomaniacs in organizations, unfortunately, and essentially toxic leaders. But equally, you also have toxic followers. And you say, well, what's a toxic follower look like, and does he have a tail with two horns on him, like that sort of character? A toxic follower can be the guy that's in the background always stirring it up. You know the kind of persons I'm talking. I'm sure you've come across them, but there's always someone that's egging on. Go in there and say that, Mark. Go in, you're on the ball. Say that. Do you think they're going themselves? No. Or as it's referred to them as, they'll pull the pin, throw the grenade, and then they'll leave the room. But you do have them. So you do have the followers equally, and they're equally as bad as the toxic leaders. They exist in organizations, and there are ways of creating interventions in this, and we'll come back later on. And as you can see, like the toxic or the unethical charismatics, which is probably a polite way of calling toxic leaders, to use a more modern terminology, best for themselves, want positive feedback only, and are motivated by self-interest and so on and so forth. So very so all the opposites to the above. And then you have these behaviors of the charismatic behaviors, ethical charismatics. Power is used to serve others, leading from behind. Followers help to develop the vision. So their ethical charismatic leadership, they include people. They develop the plans. They develop the strategies, in an all-inclusive manner, eliciting people's input. Two-way communication, pretty obvious. Open to feedback. So people have been able to take it on the chin. Negative and positive feedback. And having that level of self-confidence that you can take negative feedback and use it constructively for your own professional development or personal development, whatever the case may be. Want followers to think and to question the status quo. And that's critical because, again, when we're looking at the self-confidence and the drive and so on for those key elements down there, when you're eliciting feedback from followers, tell me the truth. Tell me what you feel. When I was having some of my appraisals in the latter half of my career, and I go into my bosses and I would say to them, right, tell me what I'm not doing so well. And the Finnish people in particular, we don't, we'll give you the feedback. I said, look, I already know what I'm doing correctly. Tell me what I'm not doing correctly. I said, at least that way I can improve. And we can exploit the stuff that I'm doing well. We can make that even better. But the stuff that I'm not doing so well, give me that feedback. And it took a couple of iterations before they would agree to give me, well, Mark, you could be doing this a little bit better. You need to tie down some of your processes and blah, 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 blah. But at least I was getting feedback. But again, it's an interesting topic of conversation, whether it is with age or with qualification or whatever that would have that level of confidence. But then again, I had always worked on every job I took on or role I took on in an organization. My own personal vision and goal for that role was to make it redundant over a period of time. In other words, work myself out of a job. And for that reason, I became a little bit of a thorn in the side of some of my bosses, because, oh geez, yeah, he's gotten that done and all the work is so well defined and bad, delegated out, everyone, so the team is carrying it on. And I'd say, right, what's next to be done, kind of thing, you know. I don't know, maybe that's odd. I don't think so. I mean, a lot of people would think like that. Why? Because they like challenges, they want change, and so on. So 3 virtues: courage, sense of fairness, and integrity. Carried right through the whole scenario. I'm going to, because we're under time pressure, I'm going to let you read down through these, but the unethical, they use the power to dominate others, and so on. So all the mirrored opposites of what we just looked at in the previous, you know, insensitive to followers' needs, and so on. So they're you know, and that's where everything starts to break down. First and foremost to go is trust, and then of course respect. All of that starts to clamp down because people close in when they start experiencing these unethical type situations. Sorry, I'm getting out of the way of the screen. Move down to the side. These unethical type behaviors. So, reducing risks of this. So, having a clear written code of ethics or code of conduct within an organization. And this is how we have to mitigate. We have to put this stuff in writing and be more and more explicit as to our conduct and so on, which is fine. At least it gives us some level of guidance in what's accepted and not accepted. Recruit, select, and promote managers with high ethical standards. Now that's going to be difficult, you know, so that's where our assessments have to come in, and looking at past records and performance and the rate at which performance would have taken place. You know, how quickly a person shot to stardom inside an organization. Was it through sheer ability, or was there something else at play? That might have questioned ethical behavior, and so on and so on. So you know, you need to look at these, because oftentimes you bring someone into an organization and they may have all the credentials in the world and perfect for the job, but may not just have the personality. That's why there's so much effort and energy or money spent on psychometric testing. Certainly the higher in the organization or the more senior roles you're applying for, these tests become far more rigorous in the number of interviews you go through, and the assessments, because it's so costly to if a company gets it wrong. Hire somebody and say, sorry, probation, 6 months, 3 months, no fit, no can do, start the whole process all over again. So they like to try and get it right the first time, which is fine. It's expected. Train leaders how to value, seek, and use diverse points of view. In other words, that they're not overly confident. In other words, their arrogance doesn't blind them to feedback, input, constructive or otherwise, from people. Sometimes you get people inside in team meetings and so on, so that won't work and this won't work and you can't do that and you can't do this, and and the general consensus, oh Jesus, Mark is an awful naysayer, you know, he's an awful whinge and gripe and so on and so forth. But in actual fact, they might be adding something really valuable, and oftentimes they are. Sometimes we refer to it as black sheep leader followership, and sometimes we have black sheep leaders. So they're radical to the point that they can't sound, they're outside the norm, they're outside the normal thinking of the group as such. But what they're doing and the value they're bringing is that they're highlighting, they're not sucked into this group think type of a situation where everyone follows along like sheep, you know, which does happen, unfortunately. But these guys or ladies say, well, you know, if you do this, this is the consequence. So they're thinkers. They're looking at things from different perspectives, and this is where we're trying to bring in when we look at leadership and critical thinking and the skill sets that you know that you can augment, which I'm sure you already have anyway in various levels. But to be able to take it to these next levels and understand these, and then celebrate and reward those who exhibit ethical behaviors. So reducing this, so looking at how we nurture and cultivate true leaders or true charismatic leaders, and mitigate the unethical side. Transformational leadership, I know I'm cutting it close here, excuse me, generates awareness and acceptance of group's purpose and mission. So get followers to accomplish more than so, and essentially transformation management. often a very well used term, and organizations moving from one level to the next are changing, could be changing market, changing processes, being redefined, a new org chart and all this sort of stuff that goes on. But essentially we need or if an organization is in having difficulty in surviving or maintaining their profitability and so on, they need to transform themselves. And that's where you have really effective transformational leadership coming in. And that really does bring into power the effectiveness of followers. Some levels of management, because we have to be very clear about the objectives in the short term. We need to get this, achieve this, and measure it, bang, bang. But the upside of it is it's not just about achieving the objectives and measuring and say, yes, we need to do this or else we're all done for. We need to be able to measure these, to be able to feed back and say, we're accomplishing stuff. See, here's the results. Here are the results. We're achieving, we're moving things forward. So now we get the momentum going such that the leadership begins to supersede the pure management by objective type kickstart that the organization needs in a transformational environment or challenge or transformation strategy. So the components of transformational leadership: charisma or idealized influence, inspiration, motivation, intellectual stimulation, and individualized consideration. So yeah, almost the same of what we've defined and spoken about, already tonight. Inspiration and motivation. Setting the standards by do as I do, not just as I say, kind of thing. So being an exemplar of how to achieve work ethic. Now that doesn't mean that you come in at 6 o'clock in the morning and stay there until 10 o'clock at night and expect everyone else to do it. Sometimes that can backfire and people say, Jesus, Mark, you've got lousy time management, you're spending half the time in here. One colleague told me of a guy that in a consultancy in London a number of years ago, and this particular character had a reputation of being a really hard worker and spending phenomenally long hours inside in the office and so on and so forth, and was a little bit on the reserved side, quiet, introverted sort of chap. And my colleague who spoke to him on a particular function after a number of months when he broke the ice to get to talk to him, said, Jesus, Dave, he said, I have to admire, I said, I heard a lot about you. You spend so much time inside here. You're the first in the morning and last out at night. And, I said, how do you keep that pace going? I said, it's relentless. And he said, come here till I show you. I have to zoom this up. Big zoom. He said, come here till I show you. He said, see that car down the car park? That cost me 60 quid. No? The car cost me 60 quid in the car park. The perception was that the car was always in the car park the first thing in the morning. It was stationary there. He just moved it around from one parking spot to another over time. True story. But did it work? Yeah, it did for him. Anyway, where am I now? Just wrapping up on the last couple of bits here. Productive states, unproductive states, disconnected from people. When we look at emotional intelligence, as we move towards self-awareness, and this is where I'm bringing you, we're starting in the middle here, in this middle part of the diagram. You're going to start evaluating your own self-awareness through these tests and so on and so forth, and then we move on through into the present and the future state as we go along. And then if you look at the last one down here, unproductive states, you're indifferent, you couldn't care, you've no drive, you've no commitment, there's nothing motivating you. Therefore, you need to get some positive influence. Could be other characters, could be a threat of a job loss, and so on. But in any case, we empower ourselves to become more contributive and effective within our own organizations, ultimately. And lastly, the final thoughts from this guy, David Goldman. If your emotional abilities aren't in hand, if you don't have self-awareness, if you are not able to manage your distressing emotions, you can't have empathy and have effective relationships, then no matter how smart you are, you're not going to get very far. So, in other words, encapsulating all of those points and qualities, attributes, traits that we spoke about earlier on, you need to work with people. You need to be able to interact And that's where the leadership comes in, even if it's only self-leadership, right up through the echelons inside an organization. So, folks, just let me reduce and close, and we'll go back. Yippee! Any questions, comments, insults, jokes, even?
I won't be able to sleep unless I get that joke about the consultant in London. You may run us through that. I don't know if anyone else got it.
Um, one of my colleagues, he was working with a consultancy company in London. This character in the company had he knew about this guy who's, had great reputation, spending long hours inside there, and the perception was that he was spending morning, noon, and night there, coming in first in the morning and last to leave in the evenings, and that he was, really hard worker, and but almost treated like a god. These people that are the super experts and nearly embarrassed to go up, or you'd be afraid to ask him a question. He had that kind of persona about him, and purposefully so, because he didn't want people disturbing him, or really knowing what he was doing. The car, when Ollie was the actual guy, the colleague of mine, who was talking to this guy on a social function. After a number of months, he braved it. Ollie is an organizational psychologist. Asked the guy, he said, God, he said, you do have a tremendous reputation. He said, and how do you avoid burnout, coming in so early in the morning, leaving so late at night? And he said to Ollie, he said, see my car down there in the car park? And I said, yeah, that's the one. It's always there, the last one in the evenings, That car cost me £60. The engine didn't even work in it. He used to push it around, but because people knew it was his car, created a perception they was spending morning, noon, and night inside the place. No?
I thought he was sleeping in the car first go around, so I'm glad you got the.
I know that this isn't the 20th century. This isn't in the 21st century now, where people do that. I've worked with characters who, before emails and internet was really powerful, the guys used to come into work in one company and send emails at 10 and 11 o'clock at night. They drive in just to create the perception that they're working late. Seriously, now you can do it. You can post date or predate your time on your emails if you're into that sort of stuff. But yeah, that's it's all about perception, unfortunately, and and of course, as I said to you, people will see through the perceptions, and they will get the genuine article or not. You try to present something that's not really you, and people will see through it. That's life. That's the nonverbal communications. So, folks, I know we ran over a little bit, and we will try and keep it a little bit more contained. This is recorded, obviously. It's recorded on Zoom, but I don't use the Zoom recordings. I'll fine tune this, and I'll put it up onto YouTube, as I said, onto my channel. And a few other bits on it, the introduction and my own introduction that you didn't hear, but yeah, there's no point in wasting time anymore on that. And it will probably be closer to Wednesday by the time I get to do this at this stage, and then I have to do it all over again for Thursday night for the B Club as such. Now I might use some of tonight's with them, and vice versa. I might edit and post it, but that's life.
Well, the links will be on
Moodle. Absolutely, yeah. You literally just click on the link and it will fire you straight to the YouTube channel and into your playlist, and the actual lecture will appear inside there. And
and it'll normally be a day or two before you'd have it up
there. Yes, as it is. Let me see what they say. I might actually have first draft of it tomorrow night. I think Tuesday night is my only free night of the week, and so you might be lucky because I have you Monday nights, obviously. Then I might be able to get some time to do this tomorrow night. It takes a bit of processing, about an hour and a half, 2 hours work to get this ready for release, premiered even. Any other questions, folks, or?
No, I just want to say thanks, Mark. It was very informative, and I enjoyed it. But I do need to go now because my dogs need to go to the toilet. so I need to let them out. But I'll see you next week, and thanks a million.
Not all. You're more than welcome. Yeah, good one. I like that. The dogs. Okay, folks. Listen. On that note, I'll let you go, and we'll see you next week, please God. All right. Unless there's any more questions. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Mark.
Not all. You're welcome. We talk again.
Thank you. Thanks
Bye
very
bye.
much. Good
Bye.
night. Thank you.